Hey, Sean.
How we doing?
Fantastic. Okay. Yep, we're live. Did that double check. This is The Human Condition, episode number 7, right?
Is it 7 or 6?
I think it's 7.
All right.
Regardless, it's an important one that's very near and dear to my heart. So we're going to talk about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. I call it the silent killer. I've heard it called that in other realms as well. The reason this is very near and dear to me is it's something that I was diagnosed with in 2013. Up until that point, I had no idea where the patterns in my life had come from. I knew what hypervigilance was. I knew what anxiety was. I think people, I don't know that I was officially diagnosed with bipolar or social anxiety disorder. They were just talked about in psychological settings. Well, maybe this, maybe that, maybe this, maybe that. I didn't even know that PTSD, I had only heard of it as shell shock, right?
Right.
Something that was attributed to veterans in war. So for a big portion of my life, I was confused as hell. I lived in a state of fight or flight. Didn't know what that was either. So the way that I would deal with what I ultimately learned was emotional flashbacks was typically alcohol. It would black me out. It would take me out. So post-traumatic stress disorder, it's brought on by traumatic events that stick with you for long periods of time, possibly life. Now, not everybody that experiences trauma will develop PTSD. There's extreme levels of trauma, and then there's varying levels of PTSD also. I was diagnosed with severe PTSD. Mine goes back to childhood abuse, blah, blah, blah. We're not going to get into all that. But it's a very confusing illness, right? Because it comes in spurts. So it's anxiety, it's bipolar, it's panic, it's alcoholism, it's addiction, it's everything across the realm of personality defects or illness or mental illnesses. It's all of them compiled into one, and it happens all in one moment in what's called a flashback. And the level of suicide amongst people who suffer severely from this condition is massive. Yet it's often overlooked. And one thing that I've noticed now is that the term PTSD has become popularized,
Right.
in pop culture. So I have PTSD. I have PTSD. No, you probably don't. You're probably suffering a little bit of anxiety right now. PTSD, it's a whole different ballgame, and it is a silent killer. And I'll stop talking for now because I have this right here, and for everybody to see.
Right.
This is just one of the books in my PTSD therapy, and it's full. And I didn't bring all the other notebooks and the folders and the stuff that I do daily. But this right here is a process that I go through daily. Even when people think I'm doing good, I get up in the morning and, it could be the stupidest little thing, like somebody cutting me off in traffic. We always go to that. That sets me off. That sends me back into some moment in my childhood where I wasn't good enough, or I was getting abused, or I was abandoned. And now in this moment, it becomes an all or nothing situation. I go into fight or flight, and I'm not me anymore. It's the strangest thing.
Yeah, when you asked me to do this topic on Sunday, first of all, I want to thank everyone at work for helping me compile a lot of information. I work with a lot of clinicians, Brad, Justin, Narissa, Mr. G. A lot of dudes downstairs gave me a lot of good info, and some people upstairs, because how PTSD is treated and what defines PTSD. Does it have to be one traumatic event? Can it be, they were talking at my work about one big T or multiple little T's, which can create a big T,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the clinical director was talking about how the brain, when a big T, he calls it a split. Like the brain almost splits.
It absolutely does split.
And like the right and the left, it's like wham, like all neurons and everything just split. And it doesn't necessarily in the physical sense do that, but it's just like they call it a split.
Well, I can tell you that 4% of the neurons in my hippocampus, they don't fire.
Right.
Physically. It shrunk there.
So a lot of people at work were like, talk therapy doesn't really do shit for PTSD, because it's stored. It's like my brain's going to keep that, and then it locks it away. Mm-hmm. And the problem with even like the clinician Brad was saying, he's like, you lock that trauma away, right, in a safe, in the safe of your mind,
and it's so automated.
But the thing is, the safe leaks. And what happens is that you put multiple traumas in the same safe. I'm going to leak.
It gets compartmentalized.
Yeah, it's going to leak after a while. And then what happens is that certain things trigger that trauma.
Smell.
Right.
It's simple.
It could be all different kinds of things. And, it's interesting because the trauma has a physical aspect as well as that it's stored in the body. It's stored in the organs of the body as well as the brain. So it's funny, the clinical director was telling me the story while gathering all this information. He was like, it's a video. He's like, it's of a polar bear, right, up in the Arctic. And there's all these scientists and shit, and they want to tag this polar bear. So they shoot the polar bear and tranquilize it and tag it and everything. And they all kind of step back. They wait a couple hours for this polar bear to awaken. But for when it's awakening, for like 5 minutes, it's laying on its back, just kicking its legs, just kicking them out. What was going on in that polar bear is that's its way of releasing the trauma that the polar bear just experienced.
That makes sense.
You have to get the trauma out somehow. The clinicians was all talking about, what is it? EMDR.
Yeah, EMDR therapy.
They're saying that, so.
I did it.
Yeah, they're like, it's extremely fucking brutal. And I'm trying to watch the F words today. I accidentally said the F word in front of a bunch of CEOs at a hospital. It didn't go over too well with my boss.
It happens.
So there was some trauma involved after that one for sure. But they were saying that it's extremely brutal.
Yeah.
Now for kids, it's a little different. It's not as brutal, but the whole thing is if you got substance use disorder or any kind of substance abuse problem at that time, like EMDR is not for you. A lot of the clinicians were like, you really can't be doing EMDR if you're suffering from any form of substance abuse, because it's going to make you use or drink or whatever. And I thought that was very interesting because I didn't know how brutal, it was.
You can, I can attest to, you can't have any substances. And if you want to get through PTSD, and we'll just stick to it because that's the subject, but I would say this with most diagnoses, that you really need to have your brain substance free to be able to truly get through it. And for years I thought I couldn't understand my patterns, and there is a split. There was two of me. One part of me wanted me dead at any cost. For what reason? I still haven't figured that out. And in cognitive processing therapy, we think we got to the single moment where everything flipped, where all of a sudden it became this 8-year-old kid making all decisions for me. The ego would not allow me to feel that part anymore. And to the ego's credit, the ego was trying to protect me, trying to protect this kid. That kid stayed alive, and when the ego got busted down into submission for whatever reason, get broke up with, or this person's I'm not good enough, whatever it is, the way it affects a normal person. Okay, well, you move on to the next thing, right? You process through it and you're good to go. You might cry a little tear or whatever. The way it affected me is my life's over. I know what it feels like to be suicidal. I never wanted to kill myself. So what I would do is I would check out. And I learned before I knew what PTSD was and before I knew what I was going through, the way out without killing myself was a blackout. And alcohol was the only thing that could do that.
Yeah.
So for years, I was chasing therapy in AA and in different programs. I was looking. I'm like, man, what's going on? And then there were things that just didn't sit. I'm like, well, that allergic reaction. I don't know what that feels like. But so I was chasing it that way. And then it wasn't until I checked myself into Havenwick. I'm like, I'm fucking nuts, man. I can't do this anymore. It would be like every 4 months, and I would just snap, and I would beat myself into submission, usually through alcohol. And then I checked myself in, and then for the first time in my life, I had somebody describe my patterns to me, and it was a psychiatrist. I forget his name. I was only there 7 days. He said, what you're experiencing, they're called emotional flashbacks. And then he took me and then a light came on, because all of a sudden I was aware. I was aware of the pattern. Now, I don't wear this pattern. I don't say I am PTSD. It's just a thing that goes on. But my awareness of it allowed me to work through it. You can't work through it under the influence of any substance, because the space that I have, or anybody with PTSD has, between stimulus and response, it's a fraction of a hair, right? And what's the first thing that any mind-altering substance is going to do? The ability that I have
Amplify
it's gone.
Yeah.
Now it's gone. Now I have. So when I go into fight or flight, it's going to be one or the other. I'm going to fight. I'm going to flight. It depends on the situation. Usually I would flee into this abyss, and I couldn't understand why. And once I started to understand why, I still couldn't stop it, because I just didn't know what the, so anyway, this book right here, Cognitive Processing Therapy, I have to go through these exercises where I ask myself, is this real? I have to take the situation. This person yelled at me. What's the situation? This person yelled at me. Then I write the thought of the stuck point. Well, I'm not allowed to fail. And I go through all these things. There's like 8 or 9 things that I have to go through to get myself out of it. And what Dr. Brad, when he said that talk therapy really doesn't work.
He's not a doctor, but he should be.
So work therapy. It's the only, and you get an hour, so I was an hour a week with this therapist, and I got this, and I think it saved my life. I still go through it. I'm going through it right now. You wouldn't know it. I'm hyper vigilant, and I'm going through it sober right now. Had an incident happen. It was about a week and a half ago. I know how I flipped into a different person. I know how that happened. I couldn't stop it when it happened. I brought it back, and now it's usually about a 2 to 3 week pattern of having to live through this. So I have to catch myself on the way here.
What triggered the response?
What triggered the response?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a lot of ums today because this is a personal episode.
It's all right.
But so we were in Vegas. We stayed at a non-gaming casino. When we were going to leave, we went to a gaming casino. We missed our Uber we were going to go see Paris, the fake Eiffel Tower or whatever.
Right.
And then we heard it was going to be like an hour and a half. We were just waiting for our flight. So we couldn't do it. So we went back into the casino. We were killing time. I walked up to a high roller gaming table, and I pulled out some money. I don't know what made me do it. I don't really gamble anymore, but just killing time, right? I started winning a bunch of money. So I had a stack of chips in front of me from a couple $100. And in retrospect, right, I start feeling this feeling. I know there's this thing going on inside of me. But then the kicker was I lost it all.
Yeah.
I lost it all, and then again, retrospect, hindsight being 2020, I felt inadequate. I felt like I was a loser. I felt so none of this is real, right? I didn't. All I did was lose the casino's money. It was the most nothing thing in the world. All I
Right.
did was lose
Right.
the casino's
I know.
money,
Yeah.
just fucking around and playing a game. Only because I've done this can I go back and say that's the part of back there in the amygdala. That's what was triggered. I'm inadequate. I'm a loser. I'm no good. I should just jump off a bridge. And Maria was with me, and she said my eyes changed instantly. And I'm still going through. I'm still processing through that shit. It's insane.
Yeah. You know, there's a lot of responses at a casino. You know,
Well, alcohol.
and not just that, but like just the noises and the people. There's a different energy in that situation alone.
Yeah.
You know, and the energy isn't necessarily a positive one. I don't go to casino often. When I usually do, I'm not really a big gambler, but when I start gambling, if I start winning, things will go good. But I've also learned that my mind, it's a game. It's just a game. So, like, if I've got my stack, if I go in and I throw, $50 in the slot machine, and, and I'm looking at the credits and everything, and it's like, ooh, you 500 up, I got to go. I'm not going to gamble anymore. And it's tricky because when I got burned, I had a traumatic event in Caesar's Palace in Atlantic City. I was in there. I had a lot of money, and I just got brutally beat down. I was in town for my cousin's wedding, and I lost like $7,000. And I remember walking out the backside of Caesar's Palace because it goes right to the beach, and I was like, what just happened? Like, because I didn't see it coming. There wasn't a lot of people, and I just got brutally beat down. And to me, I processed that for a long time. I did not gamble for a long time. I stayed away for a long time, almost 12 years.
See, for me, it wasn't the gambling. For me,
It was
there was a series of, and I spent 4 days in the abyss, man. 4 days to where, and I'm doing good. Life's good. Life's great. I really don't have anything to complain about. Business is good. And it was that this fear. It was fight or flight, in that I was inadequate. It was so connected to something that had no basis in reality. It was, and it's unique to go through where I am right now. Like it's amazing I'm here. Like it's a miracle that I'm here, because a year ago I wouldn't have been here. I'd be 3 weeks into a bottle and puking on myself, just not really trying to end it, but just not wanting to be here.
Disconnect.
Complete disconnect.
Spiritual disconnect.
Everything
All
disconnect.
disconnect,
Yeah, all disconnect, all systems down,
Isolation.
And for me, at the end of the day, I don't take this as a bad thing. I take it as progress, because the frequency, the intensity, the frequency, and the duration have diminished significantly, because I know where I'd be a year ago. I know exactly where I'd be today. I wouldn't have made this. I wouldn't be here sitting with you. It'd be a whole different thing. And I guess I say that for people that are battling this in this way. You're not alone. Like somebody understands this shit, and you don't know how long it took me to find a therapist that actually did. And even at the end of the day, they didn't. Like there was a certain point where they had to get off, and they're like, well, maybe let's talk about substance abuse. Well, no, why are we going in reverse, man? Let's talk about
Right.
what brings what
Right.
the because one doesn't exist without the other. So we're here now.
So what we was discussing at work was that amongst addicts and alcoholics, because on record they say that 60 to 75% of all addict alcoholics have experienced PTSD.
I would agree.
Now we were of the mind that the number is closer to 90%.
I would agree.
Because there's a lot of underreporting nowadays. I think, they're underreporting deaths, they're underreporting everything, but we were really like it's about 90%. And we were
Yeah.
also wondering like how the resilience of the brain works because I started getting into it because Brad and Justin, we were talking about soldiers. That was
Yeah.
the first one. How does a soldier, let's say a soldier goes into combat, kills 200 people, comes back home, is perfectly fine. You take a soldier that goes into combat, kills one, comes back, and is completely
We're all wired different.
yeah. The wiring. Is it what plays a role? The environment, other traumas that have taken place in a person's life to little T's, big T's.
Well, I think a lot has to do with how spiritually tuned you are. Because somebody who can go over there and take 200 lives, well, how spiritual are they? How tuned in are they to the universe? They live in a space of disconnection, right? And they've found some comfort there. So I think somebody who's able to remain disconnected and they're at least on the surface happy there, I don't think you're going to experience it at a deep visceral level. But again, it's wiring. There's a lot of physiology to this.
Yeah.
Because there's things that I've gone through that other people have gone through, and they're not dealing with what I'm dealing with at 44.
Right.
Different paths, I guess.
What did you think of the EMDR?
It helped. It definitely did. This was more important to me. The CPT. I stayed on
Cognitive
EMD.
behavioral therapy?
Yeah, no, cognitive processing.
Processing,
therapy. Yeah. So this right here was it for me because I'm more cerebral. And I can dig into this, and I really do want to know about myself, and I'm willing to put the work in.
What did you do physically to get the trauma out?
It's still there. So I have to process, and this is how I process. I go through these different questions. What's the event? What's the stuck point? Go back to the stuck point in the past. What does this relate to? Is this real? And that's the most important thing. In reality, right now, the way that you're feeling, as intense as you're feeling it, is this based on reality? It's almost never. I would say 95% of the time, unless I'm in imminent danger, which I rarely am.
Right.
It's almost never. Now, I can handle a car. I can handle a gun in my face. I've done it. I can handle the craziest jumping out of airplanes. I can anything that tests my life. I can do it, hands down. But I can't take getting yelled at. Isn't that it's the weirdest thing? I guess it's not weird. I understand it, but for those who don't, just don't make any damn sense. It doesn't make any sense.
We use a lot of emotional regulation techniques at work. Dealing with a lot of clients and stuff.
You did ask the question, how do I get the trauma?
The clinician, the clinical director and stuff. Old school, Eastern. Studied under Dr. Lee. Been doing ancient Chinese martial arts and emotional regulation therapy.
Meditation.
I think since like 1971. It's one of those. And so there's pressure points on the body that help release different emotions when I'm anxiety, excitement. There's also certain pressure points that will put you to sleep. This one, the vagus nerve.
That's a big one.
Yeah,
I don't know a whole lot about it.
When I have anxiety going on, or I can't sleep, or my mind is running, like going a million miles a second, there's a pressure point that's on the side. If you follow I believe it's the lifeline, all the way to the side, you can feel it, and you just rub it for a while. back and forth for 3 to 5 minutes, and you will feel yourself decompress. You'll feel like a release go on mentally as well. Sometimes I've been trying to kick the melatonin, and I found like a lot of times at night that's all I need to do. And
Really?
there's a lot of different pressure points. There's some on the face. There's certain ones that when you're tired, you can get energy. I'll show you a lot of them. I got them all written down and stuff. And there's certain ones to use with the eyes. So like take one of these green or black squares. If I slowly run my eyes across and then down and then across as slow as you possibly can, it will.
Well, that's kind of what EMDR is.
Yeah, it'll release. It'll take it down, and it's there's so many different ones, but these when you're using these, what I'm doing is I'm getting myself out of my brain state. I need to get the trauma out of the safe. Mm-hmm. The safe is leaking, and it's leaking bad, and I've been triggered by a response, whether it's a smell, a sight, or something.
Yep.
So now the safe is open and it's leaking bad and something has happened. So these pressure points are responses to the response so that I don't act out. And so I'm treating the trauma as I'm doing this. And it rewires my brain as I'm doing these exercises.
I get so what it's doing is, what CPT does, what EMDR does, and what you're
emotional regulation technique.
But
also known as emotional alignment.
But what it's doing is it's opening up new neural pathways. So when you're conditioned to fight or flight, I know that this that's what this is designed for, to open up new neural pathways because your brain has been closed.
I don't know the exact science behind it, but what is going on is that the neurons are now refiring.
Right.
And a lot of
new
those
pathways.
Or reconnecting old ones. Because I have to physically get the trauma out of my body. It still has to come out the body, and it's got to be treated in the mind.
Yeah.
Craniosacral therapy is another one where your trauma is gonna be worked out, physically, massaged out of the body. Man, it may take some time, but it will. If you do all these things, I mean, this is not an overnight process. This stuff,
and that's what's hard. And
because we want results right away.
Right away, and when you're in that anguish, you just want out.
Right.
Get me the fuck out of here.
It's like a baseball. You look at a baseball, and it's like hard as a motherfucker, and the leather. You're like, how do I get rid of this thing? So what I got to do is I got to split the leather open and get into all that string. And I got to get that string unraveled.
And put it back together, right?
and then let it go. And let the wind take the string. And that's a hard thing to do, but it really is a process. And the more that I work on things, the more that I go to these things to treat me, my chances of healing increase. And the thing is, no one wants to do pressure points in public.
Nobody wants to do this. Nobody wants to do any of that.
The director was like, we were talking when I was getting all this information, and we were talking about meridian lines, and just by crossing the meridian line, you're activating the brain state, which is where my trauma is leaking. So just simply crossing my leg and then crossing my arm and putting it on my shoulder, I'm doing something.
Namaskar.
Right. As I'm waiting in the doctor's office and I'm sitting with my leg crossed, and my hand over my shoulder, I have crossed the meridian line twice while I'm waiting to be called. Say it takes 10 minutes. I'm healing while I'm doing that. It is simple. It is so simple. Mm-hmm. Doing pressure points in public, I have no problem doing that. I do it all the time. not as often as I'd like, but there's certain times where I'll be doing a pressure point that's like right underneath my nose because I'm tired as hell and I need a boost. And that's the pressure point that does that.
I work the mantras, the namaskar. Sometimes I feel a little goofy, but connecting those two lobes right
Yeah.
here, letting that function back and forth, that helps. I have these, I grab this, it means something. I don't have them today, but they mean something.
I want to just put this out there. I know there's a lot of people in recovery that listen to our show, and there's a lot of 12-steppers, and I want to put this as politely as I can. Doing step 4 and 5 acknowledges a lot of trauma. But if your sponsor is unskilled about trauma, you're going to want to find someone that can handle your trauma.
You just dropped a jewel. Dropped a jewel.
I'm not saying nothing bad. I'm just saying
truth,
that
man.
4 and 5 didn't treat my trauma. I was able to acknowledge it, and I was able to see where some of it was.
Oh yeah.
But the rest of the work was on me.
Yep.
Now, I never saw a therapist. I really used the spiritual kingdom to treat my trauma. I used a lot of Native American spirituality stuff to treat the trauma.
Dude.
Huge amounts of Native American rituals and techniques to treat my issues. It's just what I did. I'm not saying it works for everyone. Everyone's brain's different. Everyone's traumas affect us different. But I went the spiritual route, and there are still a few traumas that, they don't affect me the way they used to. When they happen, I don't go out and pick up a bottle. I will sit in reflection sometimes, and if it makes me reflect a little too long, I'll bust out a pad and a pen, and I'll do some writing real quick. And I'll see the things that I need to see, and I need to understand that my journey is what it's going to be. And in the past, how I treat the past is how I'm going to eventually treat my future. And there's things that I can't take with me from back here to where I'm going.
Can't take any of it.
Not any of it, but I can take the love, and I can take the relationships, and I can take the memories. But that trauma, if I don't get it out, it's going to prevent me in the future from doing the things that I want to do and going to the places that I want to go. And I don't want to relive the same traumas. I don't want to come back in my next life and have to relive the shit that I should have taken care of in the first place while I was here this time.
So, and that's an interesting thing, because so when you suffer, I don't want to say suffer, when you're affected by these negative thought patterns, which most of us are at different levels, none of us were born Christ, right?
Right.
But I believe that's, for me, that's the goal. I want to achieve Christ consciousness. That's what I want.
Don't you believe you have it right now?
Well, I believe I believe we are it. So we could get into a whole spiritual realm conversation about we are one, and that's one of the mantras that I use. I'm one with the Almighty. Whatever the Almighty is to me, I'm one with the Almighty. Lack and limitation is not real, or is something to that effect. But when I'm feeling something, I'll okay, your thoughts are getting off, man. You're one with the Almighty. You're one with the divine. And we'll go into that. But what we're talking about doing in the work that we've put in. So I love in the program the mantra, progress, not perfection. With PTSD, it's all or nothing. You know what I mean? It's all or nothing. It's got to be perfect, or the fucking world's on fire. It's one or the other. So I had to learn early on about intensity, frequency, duration, and progress, not perfection. So that way, when I fell, because you're able to get back up much quicker and move on to the next part of your life and deal with it a little bit better. you'll be able to learn from it. But what we're talking about doing, the type of work that we're talking about putting in, there's not many people in the population that are going to go to these lengths. And I think that's why medication exists, you know?
Well, also I think medication exists because it'll put you to sleep and put you in zombie land. The way that the ancestors were doing it through pressure points and breathing exercises and meditation was that they didn't want you to go to sleep. They didn't want you spiritually dulled to treat the trauma.
Right.
They realized that all these traumas that I've experienced, there's release valves on the physical body.
And with medication or alcohol, all you're doing is pushing it further down, pushing it further down.
But if I'm doing pressure points, or if I'm doing emotional regulation technique, or I'm doing other forms of spiritual practices which are releasing the traumas, using the release valves and the pressure points on the body, I'm able to get rid of that trauma without medication, without alcohol, without marijuana, really without a therapist.
I think there's some value in a therapist.
Oh, I know.
But
I know there is.
I think there's a certain point where the work's on you.
Right.
Once you have your awareness and your techniques.
Some people would go to a shaman to get rid of trauma, or their chief, the chief of their tribe, because the medicine man.
Show them the way.
Right. Doing certain rituals and doing certain activities to release this trauma.
The problem with therapists, and it's not therapists, but therapy in general, is that people go to therapists to fix them. That's not possible. You should go for insight, but the therapist can't fix you. They can give you tools, and they may.
Everyone's so quick to give you a pill, though.
Well, that's a psychiatrist, but they will.
It's just so.
My kid, I'm not giving him, but they called me into a school because he was having trouble paying attention. He's 9, 10. It's been his whole life where lo and behold, it's not happening anymore. But since day one, they've been leaning on, well, have you thought about, you know what? I know a lot about that. I've thought significantly about it, and I would sell my business and homeschool this kid before I ever put him on some medication, before his brain's even fully developed. You're out of your fucking mind, But yeah, real quick to say, hey, take this. Really, society needs people sedated. When it comes to, and I'm gonna, because you're far more versed in the recovery field than I am. Do you follow Gabor Mate at all?
A little bit here and there.
So I love most of what he has to say about the subject of addiction, in that it's a deep disconnection, and through whatever compulsion it is that you ascribe to, you're just looking for connection in some form or fashion. I think, and I don't know much about the physical aversion to substances. Don't know a whole lot about that. I have to believe that it exists, right?
Scientifically, it exists.
Right. It's written.
Yeah. I have an allergic reaction when I put substances in my body.
Right.
Which create a phenomenon of craving and a mental obsession. Doesn't matter whether it's crack or alcohol. That's what we suffer from, and it's in the it's in the genetic code.
Right.
It's in the genetic
and
code.
That's a thing.
Right.
But then what about all of the rest? All of the rest who really don't have that, but they suffer similarly because because society or therapy, or we just don't have the time to dig into each individual to really get to where they became disconnected.
Trauma can cause addiction.
Right.
Even if you don't have the genetic code.
Chicken or the egg.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
And that's just, it's just the way it is, The disconnect comes in a lot of different forms, Whatever trauma I experienced, I did when I started using drugs and alcohol, it was really to cover up emotional pain. As I got older, you wanted me to participate in a reality or a world that I didn't really find any. I'm looking at it, and I'm looking at a capitalistic society, and I'm not putting a jab
Right,
in
I know,
capitalism,
yeah.
but I
But-
didn't understand why everyone was so obsessed with money. Like money, I didn't understand how people believed that money was going to make them free or make them happy, or you have all these belongings. I
got lost there.
It sickened me, and I didn't understand. And then it got to the point when I see how the corruption works in governments. It's like, the system is really rigged for certain people to win and certain people to fail. You know what? I'm going to smoke and I'm going to drink my whiskey. I'm going to check out because this reality no longer, I find of no value. There's no value in a system that's rigged for certain people to win. So I'm going to smoke
disconnection.
and I'm going to drink. I'm going to check out. And don't interrupt me while I'm doing these two things because then you'll hear it from me, was my philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
Don't interrupt me. And ultimately, that drinking and drugging I was so disconnected that it's hard to be successful, of anything. It was just hard to hold a job.
So I wonder, though, were you more connected?
So this world, because I agree with you, I had a real problem with it.
I still do.
So to this day, but I've found healthier ways to try to deal with it. Christ said, "I'm in this world. I'm in this
Right,
world, but I'm
right.
not of it." Right, and I think that is the human condition, the experience that we're here for. How do we transcend our humanness while we're here?
But do you know how hard it is to stay in that statement all the time?
Which statement?
The one that Jesus said. I can be of
Even
this
he
world.
could-
I can be of this world, but not in it. To stay,
No, he said, "I'm in it."
yeah, like
I'm in it, but I'm not of it.
right. So,
Which is true for all of
For
us.
me to use the matrix and weave in and out of the bullshit that society offers me and maneuver, it gets tiring, and I'm not always equipped to deal with that stuff. I'm not equipped always to deal with the man or the woman who's obsessed with money who I have to communicate with, or the man or woman who's extremely power hungry and egotistical and I have to have a conversation with. I walk out of those conversations almost feeling like I need to do some smudging, like I'm going to do some smudging. Where's this Palo Santo Jesus, like I should be carrying it in my car,
But to us, or for us, not to us. So in that, because I agree with what you're saying, and I deal with it every day the same way you deal with it. We probably deal with it a lot more than we used to because we used to be able to deal with it, get rid of it immediately. So I have trouble dealing with that too. But I've found some beauty in it, in that this is the only way of the only way to, you have to have something to transcend in order for there to be transcendence.
Right. So at work, when I talk to the dudes, I call it a labyrinth. I need to come up with a new name for it because a lot of them don't know what a labyrinth is.
I like it.
And I'm like, you guys are in the labyrinth. The problem is that when I'm running through the labyrinth, I'm missing certain things that might be able to help me get out of the labyrinth. There are some days, a lot of days, that I can feel like I'm above the labyrinth and I'm looking down. There are certain days where I'm in that labyrinth and I'm running myself. I'm not drinking or drugging or anything, but the whole pace of society has got me for whatever reason where I have to be on point and I need to be moving. I need to be moving fast and I need to be on the phone and I need to do with these emails and I need to do all this stuff. And I don't like operating that way. I can do it and I'm good at it, but I really am the kind of guy where I like to take my time. I want to be prepared. I don't like being rushed. I see everything coming my way. Everyone just needs to just hold up because it's all going to get taken care of. Nothing, it all happens in God's time. Just relax. But unfortunately, society is like, bam, 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 you need it now. And then all of a sudden I'm running through the labyrinth and I'm missing things. And a lot of times what I got to do is I got to just pull myself out. I can pull myself out of the labyrinth, but it's got to be a conscious effort.
It has to be a conscious effort. Russell Brand, still one of my favorite. I don't know if you read Recovery by Russell Brand. Plug his book for him, but he said the spiritual life is like rowing a rowboat away from a waterfall. Now, you can do it, but the second you pull your paddle out of the water to rest, you have to be aware that there's a force that's going to try to take you back. It's going to try to take you back at all costs. And if you keep your paddle out of the water too long, it's going to suck you down. So I think it's a perfect metaphor for what the spiritual life is. So if we are truly spiritual beings having a human experience, and the goal here is transcendence, in some form or fashion, transcendence. Maybe at some point we all become Jesus in different lives or whatever. Who knows? Maybe we all get to that kind. But if that's it, for me to be able to accept it and not commit to the abyss on a full-time basis, I had to find the beauty in that. To me, there's beauty in the Buddhists will say, be grateful for your pain, right? It makes absolute sense to me.
Taoism, life is suffering.
It makes
Positive spin on that one.
It's hard to
And I know it is because I can feel that it is, but there's also times when I'm not suffering.
Well, does it say suffering or pain? Because I know
Taoism is suffering.
Suffering.
Life is suffering.
Yeah, Buddhist is pain. Pain is necessary. Suffering is a choice.
Right.
And I would agree more with that. I don't think life is suffering. I think we make a choice to suffer when we agree too much to our humanness. I think we have to find a way to make our spiritual selves and our human selves, which will never leave until we leave this plane, work in tandem with one another.
I think the Tao, if you read the Tao Te Ching, it's the experience through itself is there is suffering throughout.
I have read it, and I don't disagree with anything in it. I just don't remember the statement. Life is suffering.
It was an early recovery thing. I was digging around a lot,
but it makes sense. It makes sense, and that would resonate in early recovery.
How do you apply, trauma to the Eightfold Path or the Four Noble Truths? How would it fit in there?
It perfectly.
Would it treat your trauma?
It treats.
It definitely treats. That's what I like about refuge recovery, is that there's a path forward. There's a definite path forward, and the thing I like about it, when I'm there, talk to Randy a lot, and he spun me onto this guy, Stephen Proctor, maybe.
Yeah. Randy's a good.
Yeah,
ninja. He's a ninja.
Right, and he talks about it as more of a wheel than an up
spokes
or a down.
in the wheel.
The spokes in the wheel,
Yeah.
and then the things that you do set that wheel in motion, and then eventually with enough, I don't want to say enlightenment, but enough skill and offsetting suffering, it starts to spin upward on its own. I like that. I've experienced that. It makes absolute sense to me. That doesn't mean I don't still suffer, because I do.
Yeah.
And it in a Taoist, in a real Taoist way, it's a choice that I suffer, right? Even though I would say there's this PTSD shit right here, I don't have no choice in that. Well, I do. It in some form. There was a choice made somewhere along the line. Am I making it consciously? No.
True, but the brain is a tricky thing.
Absolutely.
The
thing is so tricky.
It's it likes to do what it wants to do, and it doesn't let you know how resilient yours is going to be or it's not going to be. It's
such a fascinating. It's
They say by the year 2029, scientists will have reverse engineered the brain. They've already admitted that's not going to happen. It's so intricate, and it's such a beautiful thing. To me, understanding that helps me grow. I'm just one of those people. I like to. I don't hide behind knowledge that I have anymore like I used to. I don't intellectualize, but I find beauty in that. And I find beauty in the correlation between that and the universe. And then when you dissipate the wall between the physical and the quantum, and then onto the whatever would be beyond quantum, spiritual. To me, that's a beautiful thing. If I didn't have that childlike wonderment towards that, I'd be dead. I'd be dead. That is saved. You asked me how I get
when
trauma.
the drink and the drugs are gone, what is there to look for? I'm living on spiritual principles now. I'm gonna go chase spirit as much as I can.
As much as it's
and it's a sustainable drug, a sustainable high.
It's like running with the wind.
Yeah.
I want to go chase the wind.
And sometimes I don't want to. Sometimes I get caught in the other one.
Right. And sometimes I get caught napping under the tree.
Yeah.
And the wind hits me in the face.
Yeah, so all right. PTSD.
Someone at work said, actually, the guy that should be a doctor, Brad, he probably going to be talking to me tomorrow about me saying that. So he's got a very moving story. His daughter was murdered, and he said that the trauma from that almost, he went through trauma therapy, did a lot, even went to like a trauma therapy hospital. I remember him saying and stuff.
That's tough, man.
And so he said, I even operated like I had a PTSD filter that I would take things in, and I filtered everything through my PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
And he was talking about how at certain times, like, he was like processing all this stuff, but his PTSD was the filter,
was the processor,
right? Was the processor, yeah. And he was he was the one that told me about the EMDR, and he was telling a story about how he lied to his therapist, like he's like, yeah, I'm sober, and he was telling a story about how he was doing this therapy, and he was like, man, it was brutal, and he's like, I wasn't sober. And all of a sudden, things that I had forgotten, traumas that went right into the storage bank. Like, he was like, there's tons of traumas that I didn't even, click in, and it went right into the safe. But the EMDR is like, oh, some of this is seeping that you don't know about. And it brings it out, and he was like, dude, I was like relapsing hard after that. And he was like, even now, he's like, man, I don't suggest anyone do EMDR without at least a year of sobriety, because you're going to be getting things filtering out that you don't even know you locked.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, I remember that, but where did that come from? Because you went right into the safe with it. Mm-hmm. Like, boom.
See, I don't even know. I know through this, I still think it's real premature. Because I still suffer on occasion, not as much. It's far less frequent than it used to be, but because I still do, I think there's some things that I haven't gotten to yet.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. When I did ketamine psychedelic therapy.
It's designed to protect me. It's designed to protect me.
Right.
From all the things that I don't want to feel. My brain is the pleasure center. There's going to be thousands of defense mechanisms in my brain to protect me from pain. It's just the way that the brain is designed. So a lot of my defense mechanisms so fast I can't see.
And you can't even be mad at the brain for doing that, right?
Right.
It's like, how can we be mad at our parents who were just doing the
It's-
best they could? It's trying to help.
I think that particular thing is learned in the womb, that the brain, you're here to protect me. You know, emotionally, whatever. Because a child that's in the fetus can still feel the emotions of the mother.
Right.
So it's going to get those sensory type things from that.
Well, they say it's in the third trimester that our personality starts to be formed. Third trimester until you're about 3 years old. There's different studies. Some would say later, but yeah, I never thought of that analogy. Your brain is the parent, right? And it really is just trying to do its best to protect. It really thinks it's doing its best for you,
Right.
And it's trying to navigate this world that we look at from a spiritual perspective, and not even let's get spiritual out of it because some people get offended by
It's just
but
processing.
but from a
It's processing information all the time.
It's a computer.
yeah.
It's a computer
And so
without emotion.
Right, without emotion, but it's attached to I've got a heart,
Yeah.
I've got feelings.
Let's do this right
Yes.
now.
let's do this right now.
I've got an ego.
Right. Let's go
I
ahead.
want stuff.
Let's go ahead and protect that from.
Right.
I know.
I don't have enough.
Never have enough. Man, lack and limitation, the biggest lie on the face of the planet.
Yeah.
We've all agreed to it. I remember my aunt saying, she didn't, God rest her soul. She remembered me as a kid. There's no. I became an actor for obvious reasons.
Right.
I retreated into fantasy. That's how I dealt with abuse. I lived there. My brain protected me. I got trapped. And then when I became an adult, I couldn't function in the adult world with that anymore. That 8-year-old, whatever, 9-year-old, maybe it was a bunch of little T's, whatever it was, I couldn't function in the adult world, so I was an outcast. It just
Do you believe that believing in miracles, do you believe you're in fantasy land now?
I believe everything's a miracle. Everything.
Have we turned to our spirituality as a means of fantasy?
No. I think that's the only truth that I feel.
The only absolute truth is compassion. This binding force. That's so I don't. And I've
know what I
pondered
mean?
that. I have pondered that.
Yeah, I've
and
pondered
wondered
that too.
Yeah, and it's a great question, and maybe we'll go into that next episode. But I think we're getting the. What do we got?
All right. I'm going to do a little plug here. It's a book. Bessel van der Kolk, MD. I don't ever do this. This is the first time.
Hold it up for you.
But it's called The Body Keeps the Score. I read only about 25 pages of it last night. If you have any kind of trauma-related issues or SUD issues, check this book out. I think that's good. It was amazing when I was reading this. Actually, one of the clinicians, Justin, let me borrow this. He's like, dude, you're going to want to look at this book. As I was walking around with this book at work, everyone's like, oh, you've got that book? Awesome book,
I
you know.
pick that up
And
because I don't have that book.
and I was like, wow, man, this book's real popular and stuff because I'm not a clinician or anything. And so I took it home last night and I start flipping through it, and there's everything. Oh, there's a lot. There's a lot in here. It goes into EMDR, all different stuff, the polyvagal theory, all sorts of different, and we're getting the sign.
We're getting the sign.
But definitely check it out if you guys out there need any extra help. Take a look at it.
Thank you, everyone, for the comments, the questions, the suggestions. We appreciate all the feedback. Keep it coming. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Have a good one.
Have a good one. I'm going to take my little cry book home.